welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast. We come up with stories out of the middles of our brains, and you consume the stories with the outsides of your brains. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. This is episode 2 of, what's the title again, Reed?
On Our Own.
On Our Own. This is a sequel to the last story we did, which was the Anarchy one.
Yeah, like I wrote down Anarchy of the Future, but I don't think that's right.
For titles?
Yeah, it was the Anarchy was in it, though.
Yep. So it's a sequel to that story. So go and listen to that story. But I will give you a little bit of a rundown of what is happening in this story. So last week, we started this. I had prophecy, Reed had sequel, and Seth had genre. So Reed's sequel was it had been about 40 years since the Great Sundering, the great sort of destruction of the gods, which ended up being kind of just people there to support the AI, and then the AI to kind of support the infrastructure. And true anarchy had reigned. Each man did what was right in his own eye. But in the 40 years since that's happened, a lot of progress has been made, and a lot of it's been positive. So, like, there's been schools, these sort of colleges have established themselves of manufacturing and of music. That was a big one, Reed said. Yeah, that's kind of it, right? It's like these schools of manufacturing and the creation of technology, and society is changing. It seems to be things are healing. I had prophecy, and my prophecy is that at some point in this story, probably close to the beginning, all the screens turn off and they just display we need the gods, right? Is that what I had said it was?
Yep.
Yeah. And people are confused about this. It has started to result. Part of this, what's happened with this is that all technology is shutting down, starting with the outer edges of society and moving inward. And people estimate it's going to be about 4 to 6 months, and all technology is just not going to work anymore. So that's kind of the prophecy, kind of a prophecy. I had kind of hypothesized several different reasons why, but we'll get into that later. And then Seth had genre, which was Western, which works really well with kind of a post-apocalyptic freedom is what you're willing to fight for story that we're writing here. Does that seem like a fair synopsis, guys?
Yeah, I like the idea that kind of like a Texas Ranger like
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, structure
That's right.
had kind of arisen, kind of like, you know what, we're accustomed to having the AI kind of have its hand on the lid of everything, so it kind of kept bad behavior down, but there's been some need for a sheriff in town from time to time.
Yeah, I think Seth brought that up, that maybe the people who used to be the Pantheon, right? These people possessed like some extra connection ability. I think we'd said like a great amount of empathy. And so they have kind of turned into, is that right, Seth? They'd kind of turned into kind of the Texas Rangers, kind of the upholders of truth, and kind of spearheaded by, of course, our returning character, Blind Riley, a guy who could see so much of the pattern of reality that he physically went blind.
And I think, too, what we established in the last episode is that these people, let's say, have a quick burnout rate where they also will go blind.
Right.
Which is then kind of the downfall of a lot of them who just kind of, quote unquote, end their careers at that point, but without realizing that, because if they're so focused on being able to use that one sense and then having lost it, feel like that's a loss of all their senses.
Right.
But where you have someone like Blind Riley who's been, blind since the beginning, and yet still able to operate quite easily with his powers.
Absolutely. So here's where we introduce our story elements for this week, or at least say what we have. I have Wise Old Man.
I have Hero Sidekick.
And I have Fighting Style.
Cool. Well, we still haven't decided who is the one who's turning off the screens and doing the thing. But the Wise Old Man or the Hero Sidekick or the fighting, who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first.
All right. Yeah, I guess that kind of It's a little bit world building esque.
Yeah, so the fighting style has to do with these. The only thing that comes to mind, and you guys who've read Dune could correct me if I'm wrong, but these mentat kind of people,
Okay.
right? Is that not, is that a okay
That
way to describe them?
that is a Dune thing, yeah.
Okay, but is that like a good way to describe these empath people to a point? Maybe
Yeah, to a
no.
point. Mentats really
Okay,
were people who were trained to be able to make computer-like calculations at computer-like speeds.
Yeah.
So, like probability calculations, large scale equation calculations. So they're semi. I'd say they're semi mentats.
okay, yeah,
There
kind of. I mean, that's just the only thing that came to mind with a way to
Yeah.
talk about them.
Yeah,
But anyways, was that
one of the ways to describe the mentats is that they, like Levi said, trained specifically to access brain power that isn't normally available. Like, but our brains are capable of a great deal more than we put them to, and that would be sort of the same with these guys that were from part of this former kind of circle of elites that was kind of the pantheon, that they have access there. They've kind of found a way to make use of that empathetic side, intuitive side. Maybe that is kind of a parallel, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
okay?
It works.
All right. So the fighting style is, partly to do with this class of people's kind of ability. And it's kind of something that mainly only works between another person with this capability.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think they would end up, becoming more in line with being a monster. And maybe they have a capability of doing this more, but I think in general, some of their ability doesn't exactly affect, let's say, normal minded people, but
Okay.
it involves kind of like we set up with blind Riley. He could kind of sense and tell a little bit about like the system and what was going on around him, and kind of manipulate what was being seen or unseen, and when to move, when not to move. And so kind of this class of people, I'm thinking western, right? So kind of like a showdown, except it's using this to kind of manipulate the actual function of another one of these people, where you could impose either images or thoughts. So it's kind of like a battle of the minds, where then
Okay.
almost like a computer hacker, as they're like trying to fight to like get around each other. um and so that's kind of what it is, because they're kind of on this wavelength that is, I guess you could say, more tapped into the structure of reality, right? They can kind of push and pull inside of that space, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
And so they could kind of like flex that to get into someone else's mind and either shut down functions or get them to try to make a certain action, but then while doing that would have to be kind of countering the attacks of things, and it would all kind of be like a mental game as they're like going through thought processes, trying to like look through their like neurological pathways to get them to like not be able to move their arm, to draw their gun. And then but then also having to like watch and then cut off where the other person is trying to get in at them,
Right.
right?
Sort of like a mental dueling almost.
Kind of, yeah.
And
um
does it work on people who don't have the sort of empath ability or no?
not to that degree, I would say. And another reason why they would make good, like the Texas Rangers or like the sheriffs, they can come in and then like own a situation down, like change the energy in an environment.
Right.
That makes sense. So like they could come into like a bar fight, come in and then like tone it down, right? Or rile it up if they wanted it riled up to a point, but not
Yeah.
not to the point where they could control or make someone else make or not make an action. Does that make sense?
Yeah. They could
Right.
just
So they
help.
can
No, I hear you.
they could come in, like I said, like they could come into the bar fight and then like project to like tone everybody's like hypertension down. Now
Yeah.
they could still act, but a lot of times, and I think anyone can admit to this, like they come into a room and it's like, whoa, something's going on. No one has said anything, but the tension is high. Or, the opposite way, where it's like, oh, it's just really chill, or, whatever, because the energy or something that's happened, and they can kind of affect kind of the emotional state in an area, but they couldn't make someone, like I said, that's on a normal frequency. They couldn't, let's say, paralyze them, make them make an action or not make an action directly,
Right.
like they could if they could overpower someone else that is also.
Right, so it's a strength and a weakness. It's like it's a strength because you get all these extra powers, but it's also a weakness because it kind of opens you up frequency wise to be able to be influenced should you lose the fight.
Yeah.
Cool. I like it. That would make it so that people love, like, really want to have the Rangers around, but also just don't ever want to have the Rangers around.
And that's pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of see that the Rangers aren't really sort of accepted anywhere. And they kind of turn to this Ranger thing. Some of them like do it out of like a sort of penance for what their forebears did, to everyone else.
Mhm.
That's interesting.
Because I think in the last one too, we touched on that a little bit, where like they are kind of like the other people, although they're good at doing that thing that people need done. And I think too, you might have mentioned this, and maybe it'll come up, and maybe it's a thing, and maybe we'll just say it's not a thing. But like they like to have them around because then some of the stuff does work, like the technology stuff works better or more smoothly if they're around.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
And so I think there's an amount of that that's connected, but then also being that it's like, my mind is going to like the Jedi Knights in Star Wars or whatever, where it's like, oh, you know that they can do mind tricks and stuff, and so it's like, oh wow, you kind of have an idea that they're a good guy, you might want them around, but knowing that they kind of manipulate things for
Right.
their own
Right.
plan. They could be a good asset, but they could also be, get in your way for something that you might want to do if it's not in line with, their intention. And so they have like a stigma of, needing to be around to do the job they do and get it done efficiently, and some of the other perks. But it's kind of like that, oh, are they pulling a mind trick on me? Even though the general populace can't be directly controlled by them, but it's still like that kind of like,
Yeah, but
don't
rumors
look him right
spread.
in the eyes. He might be able to take over your soul. Or
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk about the wise old man now. So the wise old man, he was about 50 years old when everything broke down. And it took probably about 6 months for him to be rescued out of the testing facility that he was currently a test subject in. He used to be one of these empath people, but he was not cooperative to the whole system, and so he was essentially kidnapped and carted away. His name is Siler. He was basically kidnapped and carted away to a kind of a laboratory testing facility, to where some entity, whether it be an AI, a rogue AI, whether it be some of the other pantheons, were trying to basically create a remote using these empath people. They were trying to augment his mind so that he could be controlled, basically. It was really the fruition of what we see in the modern day Texas Rangers, even though they're not called Texas Rangers, they're called something else Rangers. What we see them coming to fruition and having, except they were trying to do it 40 years ago, only having sort of an inkling of how it was going to work. Basically, they installed modules and things into his brain. They did lots of weird experiments on him. And he now lives in a radio tower on top of a mountain. And he basically gets all of the information kind of comes through him, right? So this radio tower is also connected to the satellites in orbit, and part of this empath seeing all reality, it all streams through him, through his brain. And so he lives like a really simple life, and he's not super interested in outside people or anything. If he stays like where he is, then the load, the information load, stays consistent and low enough that he isn't in danger of going blind or of going mad. And I imagine that the hero or someone would be in communication with him or go and see him at some point to get information, because he acts a little mad because he has like all the information like streaming through his brain at all times. That's the wise old man.
Boy, it really fits with the hero's sidekick. I'm really interested in how we develop the hero after this.
That's great. I was thinking about the bad guy, the villain. I remember we had spoken of a couple of different options maybe it was another AI. Maybe it was like sort of an occult that wanted to bring back the gods, such as they were. Do you guys have any ideas as to what the antagonists, who it is that's causing this whole thing?
I haven't come up with it, but
I
it's
have an idea, but
yeah.
let's hear Reed's hero's sidekick, and then I'll present my idea for the villain, if
Okay.
that's all right.
Yeah,
Oh,
works for me.
okay. My hero sidekick is kind of on the opposite side of the whole thing from the Rangers and from the empaths and from Blind Riley and those that are
Yeah.
still, maybe the wise old man too, in a way, but curiously connected to the wise old man because of this. Uh, Sam is the guy. He's known as Signal Sam, and he grew up in one of the outlying communities. This is where they first noticed like the comms going down, the screens shutting down with
Yeah.
even though it was kind of a post scarcity society where they had things pretty well wired. His father was a landowner and farmer, and the food was still produced. It was very efficient
Right.
and mechanized and automated and robots all connected with the AI, and the whole thing. But Sam, he was a real smart kid, and he always was trying to figure out how things work. And I'll tell you, the idea for Sam came up in my mind when our microwave broke.
Right.
So you have a microwave, right? And it just works, right? You put the food in the thing on the little plate that goes round and round, and you close the door and you push the buttons and it buzzes for its however long you set it to go, and then when you push the button, the big button, it pops the door open and turns off. If it hasn't turned off already, it disconnects your function, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a gizmo. Well, it busted, and what's worse, it busted with somebody's like dinner in it,
Yeah.
so we took the case, unscrewed the top and took it off, and you could see all the pretty little wires and circuit boards and everything, and then saw there was a little plastic doohickey that was busted. So when you push the button in, it didn't pop the door open. So we had to poke the little thing that the button was supposed to open so you could get the food out. But it's this thing is we figured out that this was an old microwave, like 35 years old, and plastic parts get brittle, and the little thing, it busted. And so just kind of fixed it and it works now. But I was thinking like, with the AI and all these systems and all the tech, you have a lot of everything associated with tech has these things like the parts. What if they get old and brittle and break?
Right.
And especially on an automated agricultural system, the particular land where this guy's father was good for growing. He was a vintner. I mean, and no matter what society, you're always going to have a demand for fruit of the vine, so to speak.
Right.
And so he set himself early on as a kid trying to figure out how everything worked. And then as when the AI went off, there was a number of discoveries that the machines aren't taking care of that anymore. I'm going to have to pay attention to make sure this stuff keeps working. And his dad had some means and was able to send him to electronics school. So he went and learned a bunch of tech and stuff and kind of bent himself to understanding, how things work. And so he was home. And when the screens shut down, they have some things they've got to deal with their product. They've got to figure out how to arrange for transport and distribution and delivery of supplies, etc. And with the traditional systems down, he said, okay, well, just because the screens aren't working, that doesn't mean that the apparatus for sending messages is broken. It's just a matter of, understanding the technology. So he became known around the community and the other farmers and the people that he dealt with is connecting up, audio transmissions, right? And for locally, it was very easy. But then he realized broadcast, so he made his way to this tower and found the wise old man. But, he was trying to set up longer range broadcast of data so that people could be in communication with each other. And then, of course, making the connection that this guy had connection with satellites, and they were still transmitting data and information. And, all this is important for for a society to keep working, and down to the very basic levels of food production and processing and distribution, all requires communication. So he didn't grow up thinking that he was going to be any hero or any hero sidekick, but he's kind of developed into a guy that's established himself as a guy with skills that is really important now 40 years down the road, how to keep society together. And his connection with the wise old man just is a kind of a no-brainer, because that's how, the people around the community, the other farmers and stuff, they called him Signal Sam, because he figured out how, to send audio messages to each other so they could, stay in contact.
Right. Okay. Cool.
So he's a kind of a younger guy, but he's just dealing with life as it is right here.
I like it. I still don't know who the hero is going to be, but he's definitely a utility style hero sidekick.
Yeah, that's what I was figuring. I wanted to, what would be needed? What would a hero in this situation need? Somebody that knows how to make things work.
Right.
So I think I have a slight idea for the villain and for the hero.
Okay, let's hear it.
It kind of, so the villain would be one of these empath people that has gone blind, gone mad, refound that he has still has power, if not greater power, being blind than he did when he could see. Basically realizing that now that he's blind, he can connect more, I guess you could say, psychically to a lot of the other systems that are in place,
Right.
because he's no longer, let's say, distracted by outward visual, and basically has reformed to try to, like, according to your prophecy, the push to bring back the gods, aka then looking to then reestablish himself or a group of people back in a position to control the technology, basically retake power like they had before. And so like, he's found a way then to send out certain things, and maybe from where he's at, he can't control it completely unless he's given access to all these individual systems again. And that's what
Right.
he wants, is for people to turn over all of their technology, their systems that they've built over time, now these last 40 years, to take care of their own communities, to back to a centralized location under his control ultimately. Does that make sense?
Right.
Absolutely.
And I think the hero would then be, again, one of these people. We kind of touched on, someone maybe like this in the last episode, where he's also one of these empaths. But it's like he's stuck where it's like he's very careful with his power, very methodical, doesn't push himself to try to like eke out his, time, as it would be. But I think it's like he's getting to that point where it's like vision is starting to go hazy. He might have a year left. He's trying to, like, now figure out, what's he going to do with his life? What's going on? How is he going to move on from here? He's been ever so careful, right? And somehow I think maybe he has to go find Blind Riley, if he's still alive, because maybe that's something they've lost over, the last 40 years. And only some people, like the villain, realize that, there's a whole different, let's say, world they can connect to in a different way once they lose their physical sight.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this might be how we want to bring about an ending, but what the villain is trying to accomplish is what needs to happen, but not in a central location. But instead of just being lawmen, right, creating a different trade for these people to then, in their own local areas, run those diagnostics, efficiency, operating, but not centrally, but almost like a different trade, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking that that the wise old man, he begins to fulfill the role of a deity slash god of information by just having the ability to sort of throughput all of this knowledge. And when you said what needs to happen is that those things need to return, but not in a centralized location, I kind of like that idea that, like, the gods need to, like, all the gods gathered to Mount Olympus and they weren't around the earth and things were falling apart. So things fell apart, and then the sons and the daughters of the god spread throughout the earth, and are now providing the function. And I'm saying the gods, but obviously there aren't deities. It's like these empaths are the next stage in evolution, and the thing that they're here to fix is the sort of terrible inefficiencies brought on by the AI. And so they'll take kind of, by the end of this story, several of them will take kind of what could be considered God roles, you know? I don't know. I'm just thinking through this when you said what needs to happen is they do need to return, just not all clumped together. My brain just went, oh my gosh, this wise old man is like fulfilling the position of a god, except he's not doing it under the authority of all the other gods. It's like these are just acts of nature. These are just systems of balance that need to be reinserted into the world. And what happened is they weren't around for a long time, and so these people were evolved or created or whatever to fulfill the need, but they didn't fulfill the need correctly, and so then it fell again, and now they are fulfilling the need a little bit more correctly by going around being lawmen and constantly putting things right. I don't know. My brain was just going on with that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
When you and Seth were talking, I was thinking we should change the name to The Blind Leading the Blind. I kind of like that.
Okay, we can do that. The blind leading the blind. So we have our villain then.
Should we have a name? I just call him an empath. What did you say, Seth? What did you call him?
Oh, at first I was relating him to like the Mentats from Dune,
Yeah, but
but
did you have a name for this character?
For the
for the
villain,
villain, no, not particularly, because I just came up with what was being talked about and then filling a role. So I didn't have a name. So if someone has a name,
I think that his name, whatever his name is, it should stand for like the end altogether. Like, how do I say this? Like his name stands for like a destruction that we can only accomplish by staying all in one place. Babel,
I like it.
right? Because his goal is to lead the people and to get the people back to the way it was and the way it used to be, which would eventually only just lead us back to the same destruction that they've been working 40 years to get out of, you know?
That's kind of cool.
Right. Speaking of, you guys should both read the book Snow Crash, which is thematically similar in a lot of ways. But well, should we call it there and then figure out how this story ends next time? Unless you guys have any other interesting world building elements you want to add to this right at the end.
earlier I had a name for what the Texas Rangers could be called, but it's skipped my mind now. So maybe I'll remember it next time.
I kind of like the
It
name
had something to
Knights.
do with them being blind, but blind something, but I couldn't remember, like, just as like a as it had something to do with like them, like the reminder that they are blind, so that in their operation it's kind of like a slap in the face that, they're looking at kind of the terminus of where their path is leading, but I can't remember what word combination I had to make that work.
Well, if you think of it next time, let us know. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast. If you liked this episode, if you want more of this episode, let us know. Send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com or message us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. Until next time, we will see you guys later. Bye.